Hello, everyone, and welcome to As the Crow Writes. My name is Britton Tyler, or BT. We have here with us again Jesse Fernandez.
Hello, hello.
We're going to dive into our first discussion video here, how to come up with a compelling story. Jesse, where do you think you fall on the compelling scale? Do you think it becomes a bit relative, or do you think there is a defined trait, something that you can say, this is what makes a story compelling?
I think whenever you're dealing with anything artistic, there's going to be a level of subjectivity to it. But to me, compelling is what is the question that a early chapter is asking. That's like almost the lifeblood of what compelling is. That doesn't mean it necessarily has to be like a Sherlock Holmes book, but I think a lot of stories ask questions. For instance, if you see a magic system, the question that the reader might be thinking is, how is this magic system going to develop throughout the book? How does this interact with the story? Even if something's not a mystery, I think a compelling story is always asking some kind of question.
My two examples for that are some classics, 1984 and Dracula. These are both very compelling because of what you just said. They don't necessarily have a foreboding mystery that's revealed right then and there. It's more of, here's an introduction to the setting, and the writer is able to pull off some of that mystery from within by asking the questions, what's going on here? The world becomes a bit of a character in itself. So you're obviously with the protagonist in both of these novels at the very beginning. And so with Dracula, it's really interesting. It actually starts from the character Jonathan Harker's journal, and he's essentially writing about visiting this particular person. It puts you in the mood really well. Do you have any that are like that?
One of the books that I think about is Verity by Colleen Hoover. The story starts in a very normal place. It's literally just an author going to meet her agent. But instead, one of the things that I think Colleen did that was really smart was literally the first paragraph is the main character is standing on the side of the road and someone trips and falls and their head gets run over by a car and it pops and explodes all over her. And it sets the mood really, really quickly. This is very dark and it is very gory, and get ready for it. The beginning of that story could have been extremely boring if not for those like really masterfully put in mood setters.
You have not read Red Rising, is that correct?
I have not. I have gotten recommended it so many times. I hear it's incredible, but I have not read it.
It basically takes a really catchy prologue. It's maybe like a page long. Then it does the thing where it kind of backs up. It's almost a bait and switch. Here's a little quick preview of what's to come, and then we'll back up and just tell you how we got there. I both like it and dislike it because it acts for me like a bait and switch. I think, oh yeah, I am really pumped, and then I suddenly go to a lower stakes scenario, and I almost want to just flip the pages, and see where we're going real quick. I miss that tension suddenly. But it obviously builds and it becomes pretty epic. I mean, it's a revenge tale, so that was an interesting one for me.
I feel like that's like the typical boy on the farm fantasy trope. Even Star Wars does it. It starts with a space battle and then it like hard cuts to like Luke on a farm.
Exactly.
Do you think your dislike for that is because it's used so often, or do you just not like the formula in general?
I think it actually is just because it's used too often, especially with Red Rising. It came across as a ploy to get the reader to read. I almost say just take the prologue out and see where we go, but it almost is like afraid to because it doesn't know if the reader will continue based on that starting point. Star Wars is interesting because there is a lot of plot relevance. It's like, this is what's happening next to whatever Luke's doing. It's almost like two different storylines. You can almost fool me a bit if you have two different storylines. I actually have an example of where that happens. In the book Speaker for the Dead, something does happen in the very beginning that is like the inciting incident, but it happens not with the protagonist, it happens on a different planet. And then it jumps to the protagonist and they learn about said incident later.
It's interesting you mentioned Star Wars has like plot relevance. Writers are always told to like start with a hook, and I think a lot of people take that to mean like start with action. That's not necessarily what it means. The word hook is more synonymous with like start with something compelling, as we're talking about right now. But that compelling thing shouldn't be just like something that you're like pulling out of thin air. It can't just be like, oh, here's a war that's happening across the world and it's going to have no plot relevance until the last 10% of the book. Like, that's just lazy writing. With With something like Star Wars, it's like, okay, not only are we starting with a prologue, we're also going to introduce R2, we're going to introduce C-3PO, we're going to introduce this princess that is going to be almost immediately plot relevant. One of the examples that I think of is there's a book called Iron Widow, and it basically follows like mech fighting, like Pacific Rim style almost. The prologue begins, in my opinion, in a very compelling way. All of the mech fights are piloted by two people, one man and one woman. And the mech fight shows the man having to sacrifice the woman to basically power up the mech and kill the bad guys that they need to kill. Now, that could have very easily been a completely detached scenario that does not interact with the plot until way, way, way later. But it immediately becomes plot relevant because that character needs to find a new co-pilot, and that co-pilot happens to be the main character. So it immediately becomes relevant. It allows you to start with a compelling start, and then also has thematic elements of like, okay, we're going to be talking about some like real gender violence. I think that's very important. It seems like a lot to juggle, but if you can make that beginning not only interesting and ask a question, but you can also make it immediately plot relevant, you'll just be able to flow so much better with all of your conflict.
That might be the key takeaway is like compelling does not mean there's a lot of action going on to draw you in. Compelling is really asking a relevant question. Relevant meaning what is the idea, maybe the moral that I want to put into this story or put into these characters, and then how do I draw up a scenario to then beg that question or to delve deeper into this topic. I've even asked myself this question when writing. I say, do I start with the big inciting incident, or do I actually let it happen and then kind of discuss the ramifications of it? And so to give you an example, I mean, I decided to do the latter. I said, okay, let's actually let the inciting incident have already occurred, and let's pick up the story where there's a bit of this like fallout, inner turmoil even of the main character suffering from whatever this big decision is that he has to do. That goes to the mood that I was going for my story, is I want it to be more psychological. There are other stories that might not work. You might want to start with the inciting incident. Harry Potter is so cool because the inciting incident does happen off screen. You just don't see it right after it happens. It basically opens with that. It's a very legendary opening scene. It's very cool. And then it time jumps. And what's good about those first opening chapters is you get little hints about the protagonist and his relation to that incident and that world that he's basically going to be a part of. Okay, so that about does it. Hopefully the things we talked about can inspire you to continue writing if you are, or maybe get you thinking about, what if I could write a story? What would I do and where would I start? So take some of the examples we talked about and see where it lands. See if you like them, see if you don't like them. Let us know even. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time. See ya.